The wedding invitation arrived on our divorce anniversary. I stared at the gold-embossed card in my hands, reading Mary's name next to George Patterson, CEO of Patterson Industries. The ceremony was scheduled for exactly 1 year after our divorce was finalized. She had planned this. She wanted me to see her moving on, marrying up, living the life she always thought she deserved. I almost laughed. Because what Mary didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that the woman standing beside me in my kitchen that morning, the one who had just placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of me, was worth more than George Patterson could ever dream of being. Sarah Chen wasn't just beautiful and kind. She was the hidden heiress to the Chen Group, one of the largest manufacturing empires in Asia. And the ring on my finger, the simple platinum band I wore every day, had been custom made by the same jeweler who crafted pieces for European royalty. Mary had spent our entire marriage complaining that I didn't make enough, that I wasn't ambitious enough, that I was holding her back from the life she deserved. She worked as George's executive assistant for 3 years, and every single day she came home talking about his success, his wealth, his vision. I should have seen it coming. The late nights at the office, the business trips that seemed to multiply, the way she stopped looking at me with anything resembling love. When she asked for the divorce, she made it clear that I wasn't enough, that I would never be enough. She said, George saw potential in her that I was too blind to recognize. She said she was tired of carrying the weight of our marriage alone. Tired of being married to a man who was content with mediocrity. I signed the papers without a fight. Not because I didn't care. Not because I didn't love her. But because I was tired too. Tired of trying to prove myself to someone who had already decided I wasn't worth the effort. Now, holding her wedding invitation, I felt nothing but a distant sense of irony. Mary had left me for a richer man, a more successful man, a man who could give her everything she thought she wanted. And she had sent me this invitation because she wanted me to feel small, to feel like I had lost, to feel jealous of what she had found. What she didn't realize was that I had already moved on. I had already found something real, something genuine, something that didn't come with conditions and expectations and endless demands. Sarah had walked into my life 6 months after the divorce, and she had reminded me what it felt like to be valued for who I was, not for what I could provide. The ring on my finger wasn't just jewelry. It was a symbol of a love that didn't need to prove itself. Mary would find that out soon enough. I met Mary 8 years ago at a coffee shop near the university where I was finishing my engineering degree. She was sitting by the window, her laptop open in front of her, her hair falling across her face as she typed furiously on the keyboard. I was there to meet a friend who was running late, and I found myself watching her from across the room. There was something captivating about the way she worked, the intensity in her eyes, the small furrow in her brow when she concentrated. When she finally looked up and caught me staring, she didn't look away or seem uncomfortable. Instead, she smiled. Not a polite smile. A real one that reached her eyes. We talked for 3 hours that day. She told me she was studying business management at the same university, that she wanted to build something meaningful with her life, that she didn't just want to work for someone else, her entire life and be stuck in a cubicle. I told her I was finishing my degree in engineering, that I loved solving complex problems, that I found beauty in the way things fit together and made sense. She said I was different from the other guys she had met at university parties. She said I was thoughtful and genuine. I thought I had found my person that day. We dated for 2 years before I proposed to her. It wasn't a grand gesture with fireworks or a flash mob. I didn't have much money back then, fresh out of university and just starting my first real engineering job. But I saved for months to buy her a ring. It was small, simple, nothing like the massive diamond rings her friends were getting from their boyfriends. But when I knelt down in the same coffee shop, where we first met, in front of the same window where she had been sitting that day, she cried. She said yes, without hesitation. She said she didn't care about the size of the ring or how much it cost. She said all she wanted was me and a life together. I believed her completely. We got married the following spring in a ceremony that was intimate and beautiful. It was a small wedding, just our closest friends and family members gathered in a garden venue. Mary's parents were kind but distant throughout the entire day. They made it clear in subtle ways that they thought she could have done better, that she was settling for someone beneath her social class. My parents had passed away years before in a car accident, so I had no one to stand beside me except my best friend James, who served as my best man. Mary promised me that we would build a life together, that we would support each other through everything, that we would face every challenge as a team no matter what came our way. For the first 2 years, it felt like we were doing exactly that. We lived in a modest apartment on the 3rd floor of an older building, both of us working full-time and saving money for the future. Mary got her first real job as an executive assistant at Patterson Industries after sending out dozens of applications. She was excited about the opportunity. She said it was a stepping stone, that she would learn everything she could about business operations and then move on to something bigger and better. George Patterson was young for a CEO, only 35 years old, and he had a reputation in the business world for being brilliant, demanding, and incredibly successful. Mary said working for him was an opportunity she couldn't pass up, a chance to learn from one of the best. I supported her decision completely. I always supported her in everything she wanted to do. But slowly, gradually, things began to change between us. She started working later and later into the evenings. She started talking about George more and more during our dinners together. She started comparing our life to the lives of the people she worked with at Patterson Industries. She would come home exhausted and tell me about the international trips George took for business, the expensive restaurants he ate at with clients, the luxury cars he drove, the penthouse apartment he lived in downtown. At first, I thought she was just venting about her day, just sharing what was happening at work. But then the comments started getting more pointed and more frequent. Why don't you apply for a better position at your company? Why are you so content with where you are in your career? Don't you want more for us and our future together? I did want more for us. But I also wanted balance in my life. I didn't want to sacrifice everything, my health, my free time, my peace of mind, just for a bigger paycheck. I didn't want to become someone who only measured success in dollars and promotions. I thought Mary understood that about me. I thought we were on the same page about what mattered in life. I was wrong about that. By our 5th anniversary, the warmth between us had turned cold and distant. She stopped asking about my day at work. She stopped laughing at my jokes the way she used to. She stopped touching me casually the way she had in the early years, those little touches that said I love you without words. I tried to talk to her about it multiple times, but she would brush me off, say she was tired from work, say I was being too sensitive and reading into things. I suggested marriage counseling, thinking maybe a professional could help us communicate better, but she refused immediately. She said there was nothing wrong with our marriage. She said I was imagining problems that didn't exist. But I wasn't imagining the way her face lit up when she talked about George. I wasn't imagining the way she dressed differently for work than she did for me, spending more time on her makeup and outfit choices. I wasn't imagining the nights she came home late smelling like expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. When I finally confronted her directly about my suspicions, she didn't even try to deny it or act surprised. She said she and George had grown close over the years working together. She said he understood her in ways I never could or would. She said he challenged her intellectually, inspired her professionally, made her feel alive in ways I hadn't in years. She said she didn't love me anymore. She said she hadn't loved me for a long time, maybe even years. I asked her directly if she had been unfaithful during our marriage. She hesitated for a long moment. Then she said it didn't matter anymore. She said the marriage was already over in her heart. She said I should have seen it coming if I had been paying attention. Maybe I should have seen the signs. But knowing something is ending and actually facing the reality of it are two completely different things. I spent weeks trying to process what had happened, trying to understand where I had gone wrong as a husband. I replayed every conversation we'd had, every argument we'd gotten into, every moment where I could have done something differently to save us. But the truth was, there was nothing I could have done to change the outcome. Mary had made her choice long before she told me. She had chosen ambition over love. She had chosen status over partnership. She had chosen George over me, over us, over everything we had built together. The divorce was quick and relatively painless, legally speaking. We didn't have kids to worry about custody arrangements for. We didn't have much shared property to divide up and argue over. She took what she wanted from our apartment, mostly furniture and decorations she had picked out, and I let her take it without fighting. I didn't have the energy to fight over material possessions. I just wanted it to be over, so I could start healing. When the papers were finalized and we met one last time to sign everything, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read and said, "I hope you find someone who's enough for you, David." I didn't respond to that comment, because I knew deep down that the person who wasn't enough in this relationship had never been me. The months after the divorce were strange and disorienting in ways I hadn't expected. I moved into a smaller apartment closer to my office. A one-bedroom place on the second floor of a newer building. It was quiet, almost too quiet after years of living with someone. I had gotten used to the constant sound of Mary moving around the house, the hum of her voice when she was on work calls in the other room, the sharp click of her heels on the hardwood floor, when she got ready in the mornings. Now there was nothing but silence. Just me and my thoughts and the occasional sound of neighbors through the thin walls. I threw myself into work as a distraction from the pain. My job as a senior engineer at a mid-sized tech firm wasn't glamorous or particularly exciting, but it was steady and reliable, and I was good at what I did. My boss appreciated my attention to detail and problem-solving skills. My colleagues respected me and enjoyed working with me on projects. But I knew Mary had been right about one thing, even if her delivery had been cruel. I wasn't ambitious in the way she wanted me to be. I didn't want to climb the corporate ladder at any cost. I didn't want to sacrifice my evenings and weekends, and personal life for promotions and fancy titles. I wanted to do work that mattered and made a difference, but I also wanted a life outside of work that brought me joy. Mary had never understood that fundamental difference between us. About 4 months after the divorce was finalized, I met Sarah at an unexpected place. It was at a charity fundraising event that my company was sponsoring for a local children's hospital. I hadn't wanted to go, feeling like I wasn't ready to be social yet, but my boss insisted it would be good for me. He said it would be good for me to get out of my apartment, to network with people from other companies, to remember that there was a world beyond my small apartment and my office cubicle. So, I went reluctantly. I put on my best suit, forced what I hoped looked like a genuine smile, and told myself I would stay for exactly 1 hour and then leave quietly. Sarah was standing by the bar area, holding a glass of champagne in her hand, looking as uncomfortable as I felt in the crowded room. She was beautiful in a way that didn't demand attention or seem calculated. She had long dark hair that fell past her shoulders, delicate features that seemed almost porcelain, and dark eyes that seemed to take in everything around her without judgment. When our eyes met across the room, she smiled at me, and I found myself walking over to her without even thinking about it. We talked for the rest of the night, long after I had planned to leave. She told me she was in town for business meetings, that she worked in international trade and import-export operations, that she traveled constantly between countries and rarely had time to slow down and enjoy life. I told her I was recently divorced and still figuring things out. That I was still figuring out what came next in my life, that I wasn't really a charity event kind of person normally. She laughed at that comment, a genuine laugh that made her eyes crinkle. She said she wasn't really a charity event person either, but sometimes obligations required attendance. We exchanged phone numbers before the night ended. Over the next few weeks, we texted frequently throughout the days. She was funny and quick-witted, thoughtful in her questions, and refreshingly honest about her own life and struggles. She didn't play the games that so many people played in early dating. She didn't try to impress me with exaggerations or make herself seem more interesting than she was. She just talked to me like I was someone worth talking to, someone whose thoughts and opinions mattered. When she asked if I wanted to meet for dinner during her next visit to the city, I said yes without hesitation or second guessing. That first dinner turned into another dinner the following week, which turned into long walks through the city, exploring neighborhoods neither of us had visited before, which turned into entire weekends, spent together exploring museums and parks, and little cafes tucked away on side streets. Sarah was easy to be with in a way I had forgotten was possible. She didn't make me feel like I had to be more than I was or pretend to be someone different. She didn't ask me to change fundamental parts of myself or to prove myself constantly. She just accepted me exactly as I was, flaws and all. I didn't know she was wealthy for months. She never mentioned it or brought it up. She dressed simply in jeans and casual tops, drove a modest car that was a few years old, and lived in a nice but unassuming apartment when she was in the city. It wasn't until 3 months into our relationship that I found out the truth about her background and her family. We were at her apartment cooking dinner together, something we had started doing regularly, when her phone rang loudly from the counter. She glanced at the screen and sighed deeply. She said it was her father calling, that she had been avoiding his calls all week because she knew what he wanted to discuss, but she should probably answer this time. She stepped into the other room for privacy, and I heard bits and pieces of the conversation through the thin walls. Something about board meetings and quarterly reports, international contracts, and shipping delays, family obligations, and expectations. When she came back into the kitchen 15 minutes later, she looked tired and stressed. I asked if everything was okay with her family. She sat down across from me at the small kitchen table and said quietly, "There's something I need to tell you, David. Something I should have told you sooner." I felt my stomach drop with anxiety. I thought she was about to end things between us. I thought I had misread everything and she was about to tell me this wasn't working. But instead, she told me about her family and their business empire. The Chen Group. The factories spread across multiple countries, the massive distribution networks spanning continents, the billions in annual revenue that made them one of the most powerful families in Asia. She said she had kept it from me intentionally because she wanted to know I liked her for who she was as a person, not for what her family had or what connections she could provide. She said too many people in her life had used her over the years, had pretended to care about her while really just seeing her as a means to an end, had wanted access to her family's money and influence. I didn't know what to say for a long moment. She asked quietly if it changed anything between us, if I saw her differently now. I told her it didn't change a single thing. I told her I had fallen for the woman who laughed at my terrible jokes and puns, who challenged me to think differently about the world, who made me feel like I mattered and my thoughts had value. who listened when I talked about my work like it was actually interesting. I told her, money didn't change any of that or make me feel differently about her. She cried when I said that. She said no one had ever said something like that to her before, that everyone else had changed their behavior once they found out. That night, she gave me the ring that I now wore every single day. It was platinum, custom made by a jeweler her family had used for generations. Elegant in its simplicity without being flashy. She said it wasn't an engagement ring, not yet anyway, but it was a promise. A promise that we were building something real together, something based on genuine feelings rather than expectations or obligations. I wore it every day from that moment forward. And I never told Mary about it when I occasionally ran into mutual friends. I never told anyone really. Because it wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about knowing my own worth and being with someone who saw that worth clearly. But now, holding Mary's wedding invitation in my hands, I realized that my silence had been a mistake. Because Mary had built her entire new life on the assumption that I had stayed small and insignificant, stayed stagnant in my career, stayed the same man she had left behind without a second thought. She had absolutely no idea how wrong she was about that. I couldn't stop thinking about the invitation, no matter how hard I tried to focus on other things. It sat on my kitchen counter for 3 full days, the gold lettering catching the light every single time I walked past it on my way to the coffee maker or the refrigerator. Sarah noticed it, of course. She always noticed when something was bothering me, even when I tried to hide it. "Are you going to go to the wedding?" she asked one morning as we sat at the counter drinking coffee together before she had to leave for a business meeting. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "Part of me thinks I should just ignore it completely and throw it away. But another part of me wants to go and see it happen. Wants to see her realize she didn't win some kind of competition." Sarah reached across the counter and took my hand in hers, her touch warm and comforting. "You don't need to prove anything to her, David. You know what we have together. That should be enough." She was right, and I knew she was right. But there was something still unresolved in me, something that still ached when I thought about the way Mary had looked at me that last day we signed the papers, like I was an obstacle she had finally managed to remove from her path to success. I decided to RSVP yes to the wedding invitation. When I told Sarah about my decision, she raised an eyebrow but didn't seem surprised. "If you're going to this wedding, then I'm going with you. I'm not letting you walk into that situation alone." I started to protest, saying she didn't need to waste her time on this, but she cut me off firmly. "I'm not letting you face your ex-wife alone, David. Besides, I think it's time Mary met the woman who actually values you for who you are." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Work was busier than usual with several major projects reaching critical deadlines. Sarah had important meetings scheduled in 3 different countries over 2 weeks. But we made time for each other in the evenings, the way we always did no matter how busy life got. She never made me feel like I was competing for her attention with her work. She never made me feel like I was less important than her career ambitions or business obligations. It was the complete opposite of everything I had experienced with Mary during our marriage. One evening, as we sat on the couch together, watching a movie neither of us was really paying attention to, Sarah asked me about my marriage to Mary. She had never pried before about my past, never pushed me to talk about painful things I wasn't ready to share. But now, with the wedding looming closer, she wanted to understand what I had gone through. I told her everything over the course of an hour. The coffee shop where we met. The proposal I had been so nervous about. The early years when things were good. The slow unraveling as her priorities changed. The way Mary had looked at me with something close to pity when she said she wanted a divorce. Sarah listened without interrupting even once. When I finished talking, she was quiet for a long moment, processing everything I had shared. Then, she said softly, "She didn't deserve you, David." I laughed bitterly at that. I think she would say I didn't deserve her, that I wasn't good enough. Sarah shook her head firmly. No. She wanted someone who would elevate her status in society, someone who would make her look successful to other people. She didn't want a real partner. She wanted an accessory to show off. And when you didn't fit that role perfectly, she replaced you with someone who did. Hearing it said out loud like that made something click in my mind. Sarah was absolutely right. Mary hadn't fallen out of love with me as a person. She had fallen out of love with the version of success I represented to her friends and family. And George, with his wealth and his power and his influence in the business world, represented everything she thought she wanted and needed. I wondered if she was actually happy with him. I wondered if George made her feel truly seen as a person, or if he just made her feel important and successful. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep no matter what I tried. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong tomorrow. What if seeing Mary again brought back feelings I thought I had buried completely? What if watching her marry someone else hurt more than I expected it to? But when I looked over at Sarah, sleeping peacefully beside me, her face relaxed and beautiful in the moonlight, coming through the window, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This woman had chosen me. Not for what I could give her materially, not for how I made her look to other people, but for who I was as a person. She had seen me at my absolute lowest point, and she had stayed beside me. She had seen me doubt myself and my worth, and she had reminded me over and over of my value. That was real love. Mary had never given me that kind of unconditional acceptance. The morning of the wedding arrived too quickly. Sarah and I got ready together in comfortable silence. She wore a sleek navy dress that was elegant and sophisticated without being flashy or attention-seeking. I wore a suit I had bought years ago during my marriage, the one Mary used to complain wasn't expensive enough for important events. Sarah told me I looked handsome and perfect. She adjusted my tie with careful fingers and kissed my cheek gently. She said, "Remember, you're not going there to prove anything to anyone. You're going there to close a chapter of your life." She was right about that. But as we drove to the venue in Sarah's car, a sprawling estate on the edge of the city that probably cost a fortune to rent, I felt my heart begin to race with anticipation and nervousness. This was it, the moment I would see Mary again after a year. The moment she would see that I had moved on completely, that I was doing fine without her, that I was actually better than fine. The moment she would see the ring on my finger and realize everything. The venue was everything I expected it to be and more. Grand and imposing. Expensive, looking down to every last detail. Designed specifically to impress every single guest who walked through the doors. Tall white columns framed the entrance like something from a Greek temple, and a professional string quartet played classical music softly in the background as guests arrived in luxury cars. Everyone was dressed impeccably in designer outfits, their jewelry glinting in the afternoon sun, their laughter polite and rehearsed and performative. Sarah and I walked in together. Her hand resting lightly on my arm in a gesture that felt both natural and supportive. I could feel people glancing at us with curiosity, their eyes assessing and judging. I didn't recognize most of them from my time with Mary. These were George's people, Mary's new social circle. Wealthy businessmen, and their perfectly groomed wives. Corporate executives, and socialites who spent their days at country clubs. People who measured worth and value in stock portfolios and vacation, homes and club memberships. We found our assigned seats near the back of the venue. Sarah squeezed my hand gently and whispered, "You okay?" I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure if it was true. I wanted it to be true. The ceremony started right on schedule a few minutes later. The music swelled dramatically, and everyone in attendance stood as Mary appeared at the end of the long aisle. She looked absolutely beautiful, there was no denying that. She always had been beautiful. Her dress was stunning, all intricate lace and flowing silk, the kind of expensive dress she used to show me in bridal magazines years ago and say wistfully, "One day I'll wear something like this." Her hair was swept up in an elaborate style, her makeup flawless and professional. She looked like she had stepped directly out of a bridal magazine cover. But when her eyes swept across the crowd of guests and landed on me sitting in the back, I saw something flicker across her expression. Surprise that I had actually come. Maybe confusion about why I was here. Her gaze moved to Sarah sitting beside me, then back to me, and I saw her jaw tighten noticeably even from this distance. She clearly hadn't expected me to come to her wedding. And she definitely hadn't expected me to bring someone with me, especially not someone like Sarah. The ceremony continued according to plan. George stood at the altar, looking tall and confident, his smile wide and practiced as Mary walked slowly toward him down the petal-covered aisle. He looked every bit the successful CEO that he was. Perfectly tailored designer suit. Expensive watch that probably cost more than my car. The kind of man who was used to getting exactly what he wanted in life. When Mary finally reached him at the altar, he took her hand in his, and they turned together to face the officiant who would marry them. I should have felt something intense in that moment. Anger at what she had done to me. Sadness over what we had lost. Regret over how things had ended between us. But all I felt was a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. This wasn't my life anymore. This wasn't my story to be part of. I was just a spectator now, an observer watching from the outside. The officiant began speaking in a practiced voice about love and commitment. About two people choosing each other every single day for the rest of their lives. I almost laughed out loud at the irony of those words. Mary hadn't chosen me every day during our marriage. She had chosen her ambition over me. She had chosen the life she thought she deserved over what we had built together. And now she was standing beside a man who could give her that life she had always wanted. But I wondered if George really knew the real Mary underneath the polished exterior. The one who got restless and dissatisfied when things were too comfortable for too long. The one who always wanted more than what she had. The one who left when someone better looking came along, offering more. When the officiant asked in the traditional way if anyone objected to this union, the room fell completely silent. I felt Sarah's hand tighten around mine under the cover of my jacket. For one brief, reckless moment, I actually considered standing up, not to object to the marriage, just to remind Mary that I existed as a person, that I mattered, that she hadn't erased me from existence by marrying someone else. But I stayed seated and silent, because I didn't need to remind her of anything. She already knew I was here watching. George and Mary exchanged their vows to each other. They were generic and impersonal, the kind of standard vows you heard at every single wedding ceremony. Promises to love and honor and cherish each other. Mary's voice wavered slightly as she spoke her lines, and I wondered if she was thinking about the vows we had exchanged 8 years ago in that garden. The ones she had broken without any hesitation when something better came along. When the officiant pronounced them, husband and wife, in a booming voice, George kissed her dramatically, and the crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause. Mary smiled for the guests, but even from where I sat I could see it didn't reach her eyes. She glanced toward the back of the room, toward where I sat with Sarah, and for just a split second, I saw something in her expression that looked almost like doubt about her choice. But then the moment passed and it was gone. The reception was held in a massive ballroom adjacent to the ceremony space. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting soft romantic light over the elegantly decorated tables below. There was expensive champagne flowing freely, caviar and other delicacies on silver platters, an elaborate ice sculpture in the shape of 2 swans. Everything was carefully designed to display wealth and status. Sarah and I found our assigned table in the seating chart. We were seated with people we didn't know at all, other guests who had clearly been invited out of social obligation rather than genuine connection to the couple. They made polite small talk with us, asking generic questions about where we were from and what we did for work. Sarah answered gracefully and pleasantly, never revealing too much about herself or her family background. I admired that quality about her so much. She didn't need to broadcast her success and wealth to feel important. She carried it quietly with dignity. Halfway through the elaborate dinner service, Mary and George made their rounds as newlyweds, stopping at each table to personally greet their guests and accept congratulations. I felt my pulse quicken with anxiety as they approached our table. Mary's smile was bright and practiced and perfect for the cameras, but when her eyes met mine directly, I saw the carefully constructed mask slip for just a moment. "David," she said, her voice carefully controlled and neutral. "I'm so glad you could make it to celebrate with us." "Congratulations," I replied evenly. "You look absolutely beautiful, Mary." "Thank you so much." She glanced at Sarah sitting beside me, her expression sharpening with obvious curiosity. "And who is this lovely woman with you?" "This is Sarah," I said. "My girlfriend." Sarah extended her hand graciously, her smile warm and genuine. "It's lovely to meet you, Mary. David has told me quite a bit about you over these months." Mary shook her hand, but I saw the way her eyes lingered on every detail of Sarah's appearance. Her elegant dress that was clearly expensive. Her simple but obviously real jewelry. The effortless elegance and confidence she carried naturally. Then Mary's gaze dropped to my left hand, resting on the table, to the platinum ring on my finger that caught the light. Her eyes widened noticeably in recognition. "That's new," she said, her voice tight and strained. "I don't remember you wearing that before." I glanced down at the ring, then back at her face. "Yes, it is relatively new." George, apparently oblivious to the tension crackling between us, clapped me on the shoulder in a friendly gesture. "Good to see you, man. Really glad you could celebrate with us today." "Wouldn't miss it," I said evenly, maintaining eye contact with Mary. They moved on to the next table to continue their rounds, but I could feel Mary's eyes on me for the rest of the night, watching and analyzing. The rest of the reception passed in what felt like a blur of champagne toasts, and carefully choreographed dances and speeches. George gave a long speech about love and partnership that felt hollow and rehearsed to my ears. Mary smiled beside him the entire time, playing the role of the perfect bride flawlessly for all the guests and photographers. But every single time I looked up from my conversation with Sarah, I caught Mary staring at me from across the room. At Sarah. At the ring on my finger. At everything she couldn't quite understand or process. Sarah noticed too, of course. "She looks completely rattled," she whispered to me during the first dance while we watched George and Mary glide across the floor. "I don't think she expected you to move on at all, let alone with someone like me." I never told her I had moved on with someone, I admitted quietly. I didn't think it mattered to her anymore what I did with my life. "It clearly matters to her now," Sarah observed astutely. As the evening wore on and the sky outside darkened, Sarah excused herself to use the restroom. I stood alone by the bar area, nursing a glass of expensive whiskey I didn't really want, when Mary suddenly appeared beside me like she had been waiting for this exact moment. She had changed out of her elaborate wedding dress into a sleek cocktail dress for the reception. She looked stunning as always, but there was something brittle and fragile about her, now that I hadn't seen before. "Can we talk privately for a moment?" she asked, her voice low and urgent. "Please." I glanced around the crowded ballroom. George was across the room, deep in animated conversation with a group of important-looking businessmen, completely absorbed in whatever they were discussing. I nodded slowly. "Sure, we can talk." We stepped out onto a stone balcony, overlooking the manicured estate gardens. The night air was cool and refreshing after the stuffy warmth of the ballroom, and the sounds of the reception faded into muffled background noise behind the closed doors. Mary leaned against the railing, her fingers gripping the cold stone edge tightly. "You brought her to my wedding," she said finally. Her voice sharp and accusatory. Her voice carried an edge I remembered from our worst arguments. "I did bring her," I confirmed calmly. "Why would you do that? Why would you bring another woman to my wedding?" "Because she's important to me, Mary. Because she's part of my life now." Mary let out a bitter laugh that sounded more like a sob. "I thought you would come alone to this. I thought you would see all of this and realize what you lost when you let me go." I turned to face her directly, meeting her eyes. "What exactly did I lose, Mary? A wife who didn't love me anymore. A marriage that ended because I wasn't ambitious enough or successful enough for you. That's not fair to say, David. Isn't it completely fair? You told me directly to my face that I wasn't enough for you. You told me George was everything I could never be in a million years. So I let you go. I let you have the life you always wanted. Why does it bother you so much that I found someone who actually values me for who I am?" Mary's eyes filled with tears that threatened to spill over and ruin her perfect makeup. "Because I didn't think you would move on so easily. I thought you would stay exactly the same as you were. I thought you would stay stuck in that same place." "I was never stuck in one place," I said quietly but firmly. "I was content with my life. There's a significant difference between those two things. But you couldn't see that about me. You couldn't see me as a real person with my own valid values." She wiped at her eyes carefully, smudging her makeup slightly despite her efforts. "Who is she really, David? That woman, Sarah. She's not just some random girlfriend you picked up somewhere. I can tell just by looking at her. Her name is Sarah, as I said. And you're right about one thing. She's not random at all. She's brilliant and kind and thoughtful, and she sees me for exactly who I am, not for what I can give her materially." Mary's jaw tightened visibly. "Is she wealthy? Is that why you're with her?" I hesitated for a long moment, then decided there was no point in hiding the truth anymore. "Yes, she's wealthy. Very wealthy, actually." Mary's face went pale in the moonlight. "How wealthy are we talking about? Does it really matter how much money she has?" "Yes, it matters to me. I need to know." I sighed deeply. "Her family owns the Chen Group, the international manufacturing empire." Mary's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. "The Chen Group? As in the actual Chen Group that's worth billions?" "Yes, that's the one." She stared at me in stunned silence, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find any words. Finally, she whispered. "So, you're telling me you ended up with someone who's wealthier than George? Wealthier than his entire family?" "I didn't end up with her because of her family's money, Mary. I didn't even know about her background for the first 3 months we were together. I ended up with her because she loves me genuinely, because she makes me feel like I actually matter as a person, because she values who I am, not what I can provide for her." Mary looked away from me, her hands trembling visibly as she gripped the railing. "I thought I made the right choice, leaving you. I really thought George was everything I needed to be happy. But lately, especially these past few months, I've been wondering if I gave up something precious that I can never get back." "You did give up something," I said, my voice firm and clear. "But not because of money, or status or any of that superficial stuff. You gave up a real partnership. You gave up someone who would have stood by you no matter what happened. And you can't get that back from me, Mary. Not now. Not ever." She turned to face me directly, tears now streaming down her face freely. "Do you hate me for what I did to you?" "I don't hate you at all. I just don't love you anymore. Those feelings are completely gone." She physically flinched as if I had struck her hard across the face. Before she could formulate any response, the balcony door opened suddenly, and Sarah stepped out into the cool night air. She took in the scene before her with calm, assessing eyes, her expression protective. "Everything okay out here?" she asked quietly, directing the question at me. I walked over to her immediately and took her hand in mine, feeling grounded by her presence. "Everything's fine. We were just saying goodbye to each other." Mary watched us standing together, her face crumpling with emotion and regret. Then she turned abruptly and walked back inside to her own wedding reception without another word to either of us. Sarah looked up at me with concern in her beautiful eyes. Are you okay? After that conversation. I nodded, meaning it completely this time. I am now. I'm perfectly fine. We stayed at the reception for another hour out of basic politeness. But my mind was elsewhere entirely. Watching Mary try desperately to play the role of the happy bride, while glancing at me and Sarah every few minutes, I realized something profound. She had married George because she genuinely thought it would make her happy and fulfilled. But happiness and fulfillment weren't things you could buy with money or marry into through someone else. They were things you built carefully from the inside. And Mary had torn down the foundation we had started building together years ago because she thought she could find something better and shinier elsewhere. She hadn't found what she was looking for. And now she was realizing that truth far too late. 3 months after the wedding, I unexpectedly ran into George at a major business conference my company had sent me to represent them. I was surprised to see him there at all. He looked tired and worn down, somehow older than he had seemed just months ago at his wedding, though barely any time had actually passed. "David," he said, extending his hand professionally. "Good to see you here." "Likewise," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. We made polite small talk for a few minutes about the conference and the industry. He asked about my work and current projects, and I asked about his company and how business was going. Then, almost reluctantly, as if he couldn't help himself, he said, "I heard through mutual acquaintances that you're with Sarah Chen now. Is that true?" "I am with her." "Yes." He nodded slowly, processing that information. "That's quite the upgrade from your previous situation, I'd say." I felt a flash of irritation at his choice of words. Sarah isn't an upgrade like she's a car or a phone. She's a real person with thoughts and feelings. And I'm with her because I genuinely love her, not because of who her family is or what they have. George held up his hands defensively. "I didn't mean it like that at all. I just meant, well, Mary talks about you, sometimes even now." I raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Does she really?" He looked distinctly uncomfortable now. "She saw the ring you were wearing at our wedding. She asked me later how much a custom ring like that would cost. When I told her my estimate based on the jeweler and materials, she went completely quiet for a very long time. She didn't speak for the rest of that night. I didn't know what to say to that revelation." George continued, clearly needing to get this off his chest. "She's been different since the wedding ceremony. Distant and distracted. I thought marrying me would make her happy and fulfilled, but I think she's slowly realizing that what she thought she wanted and what she actually needed were two completely different things all along." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I genuinely meant it. Not because I still carried feelings for Mary, but because I understood deeply the pain of being in a relationship where you were constantly trying to be enough for someone who would never be satisfied. George sighed heavily. "I know she left you to be with me. She told me absolutely everything about your marriage and how it ended. I thought I was doing her a favor, giving her the successful life she deserved. But I don't think I'm really what she wanted deep down. I think she wanted the idea of me, the status and lifestyle, more than she wanted me as an actual person." "Maybe that's true," I said carefully. "But that's something she has to figure out on her own. No one can do that work for her." He nodded in agreement. "You seem genuinely happy now. With Sarah, I mean." "I am happy. Very happy." "Good. You deserve that happiness after everything. You really do." We parted ways after that conversation, but his words stayed with me for days afterward. Mary had gotten absolutely everything she thought she wanted from life: the wealthy and successful husband, the lavish lifestyle with expensive things, the status and respect in social circles. But none of it had made her happy or fulfilled. Because real happiness didn't come from external things that other people could see. It came from internal peace and contentment. And Mary had never found that peace within herself. A few weeks after that encounter, Sarah and I decided together to make things official between us. She proposed to me on a quiet evening at her apartment. There was no grand gesture with musicians or elaborate planning. No flash mob or fireworks or photographers. Just the two of us, sitting on the comfortable couch, talking honestly about the future we wanted to build together. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you," she said simply, looking into my eyes. "Will you marry me, David?" I said yes immediately without any hesitation or doubt in my mind. We got married 6 months later in a ceremony that reflected who we really were. It was a small and intimate ceremony, just our close friends and the family members who truly mattered to us. Nothing remotely like George and Mary's extravagant wedding that was designed to impress. But our wedding was absolutely perfect for us. Because it was genuine and real and ours. I didn't invite Mary to the ceremony. I didn't even consider it. That chapter of my life was completely closed now. But a few days after the wedding, I received an unexpected message from Mary on my phone. It was short, just a few carefully chosen lines that probably took her a long time to write. "I heard you got married to Sarah. Congratulations to both of you. I hope you're truly happy together. I'm sorry for everything I put you through during our marriage. I see now that I made a terrible mistake, but I know it's far too late to fix anything. I read the message twice, processing the words carefully. Then deleted it from my phone. Not out of anger or bitterness, but out of a need for closure. Mary had made her choices freely. I had made mine. And we were both living with the consequences of those choices now. Sarah and I built a real life together over the following years. A genuine life filled with meaning. We traveled to places we had always wanted to see. We laughed together every single day. We supported each other's dreams and ambitions without reservation. She never once made me feel small or inadequate. She never made me feel like I had to constantly prove myself to earn her love. She just loved me exactly as I was. And that, I realized with profound gratitude, was all I had ever truly wanted from a partner. Years later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Mary and George had divorced. Apparently, she had carried on an affair with one of his wealthy business partners, someone even richer than George with more status and connections. The divorce had been messy and public and expensive, splashed across business newspapers. George had walked away from the marriage with his dignity and reputation intact. Mary had walked away with absolutely nothing. Having signed a prenuptial agreement, I didn't feel satisfaction or vindication when I heard the news. I didn't feel happy that her life had fallen apart. I just felt genuinely sad. Sad that Mary had spent so much of her precious life chasing something that would never actually make her happy or whole. Sad that she had burned every meaningful bridge in her relentless pursuit of an illusion of success. Sarah asked me thoughtfully if I wanted to reach out to Mary, to offer support during her difficult time. I thought about it seriously for a few days. But in the end, I decided against it. Not because I was cruel or heartless, but because I knew Mary needed to figure out her own path forward. She needed to learn the hard lesson that happiness didn't come from what you had or who you were with, but from who you were as a person deep inside. And I had learned that profound lesson a long time ago, back when Mary had left me feeling worthless. Now, sitting in the home Sarah and I had built together, watching the sunset through our window, I felt nothing but peace. Mary had wanted to make me jealous by sending that wedding invitation. She had wanted me to see her success and feel like I had lost some kind of competition. But in the end, I had won something far more valuable than money or status. I had won the chance to be loved for exactly who I was. And my ring, that simple platinum band that symbolized real love, would always be bigger than any diamond Mary could ever wear.